Hey folks, how's it going? The 15th approaches and with it December's character rebalance patch. To be honest, I was expecting one before Halloween, but better late than never. The characters in the list are also a bit fewer than usual. Last time we got 2 characters per element, now only water and light are getting 2. I guess we will have to check this one to the virus as well. So much like last time, I want to try and guess what's gonna change and make a bingo card for it. Before starting, please note that everything in here is going to be pure speculation and might not reflect the actual changes. I have no inside information and there have been no leaks. This is all just for fun. The fire one is the OG Yuel, and it feels about time because her kit kinda screams 2016. Before Mimlemel, she was seeing some use for her 20% team-wide echo, but that and a heal plus clear is all she really brings. The 15% damage cap boost on charge attack is so and so since it only affects her, and she's got a low attack stat to begin with, so at least in Magna she's never really done much with it. Her first skill brings a high double attack cap and a small nuke, but it's on a 3 turns duration and 7 turns cooldown. Second and third skills are alright, the second one could use a bit of a higher damage cap, but 3 turns of 20% echo for the team is still decent. Her fourth skill is a simple 20% fire attack cap and a bit of extra healing cap for Yuel. The passives are a bit underwhelming as well. A 5% DA up might as well not be there, just like the EM passive to get stackable double attack cap. I think Yuel is in for a fairly big overhaul. When an old character gets a newer version and gets rebalanced, they often tend to get brought up to speed with them, or at least inherit some mechanics. For Yuel, her water versions brings a team-wide double attack cap, a small defense down, elemental attack and defense down, and the Fox Flame local debuff, as well as a 10% team-wide echo against foes with Fox Flame. Her wind version keeps the Fox Flame and moves the 10% team-wide echo on her charge attack, gains a passive team-wide supplemental damage against foes with Fox Flame, and a 4-hit nuke with a 600k base cap that also grants her a stackable double and triple attack cap. This skill also activates twice against foes with Fox Flame. Should she fall below 50% HP, she gets a one-time skill refresh and an instant charge, keeping the heal plus clear as well. It would seem like Yuel has some potential. She is almost surely going to get the Fox Flame debuff, and I think it's very likely that she'll get something to play off of it. The 20% echo is probably going to stay, and so is the heal plus clear. I think the changes are most likely going to affect her charge attack, first and fourth skill, and passives. A simple double attack cap, no matter how high, is really outdated as a buff. I think this might turn into her summoned version second skill, multi-hits and stackable DATA. If the buff goes team-wide, all the better. That 15% damage cap on her CA though, I think it's unlikely that it's going to turn into a team-wide one, but maybe it could get replaced with a skill reset or an extra cast for her first or second skill. It would be either more multi-hits and faster DATA stacking, or longer 20% echo uptime. Rite of Dawn is probably going to stay like that, maybe just get the base healing cap increased to 2k or 2.5k. If they want to keep the increase in damage cap, her fourth skill could really use a second buff. Either that or a damage boost or a supplemental damage buff. I don't think she's going to get something crazy like Keen or Dispel Cancel, but I would still love to get proven wrong. The Fox Flame debuff kind of has to go on her first or second skill, and passive-wise I would like to see her get the team-wide supplemental damage against foes with Fox Flame from her wind version. She's always been a buffer, she just needs a bit more oomph to do a better job at it, and a stackable DATA, a better uptime on her echo and some supplemental damage might just hit the spot. Sadly, that's it for Fire, even though there's a little ship right there who only needs one thing. For her unique buff to become undispellable like the rest of the Zodiacs. Come on, Games, it's a matter of consistency. She doesn't even need a rebalance, she just needs a hotfix. The water list starts with Uno, and for him too, it was about time. I don't think I've used him once ever since I've recruited him, and as far as I know, his 5-star version only really gets used in some Luchador burst comps. He used to be a staple in water back when strength was a rare buff, but he's been having a bit of a rough time. At 4 stars, his kit is composed of an alright 1 million base cap nuke, a substitute plus dodge and counter, and a 100% phalanx which is unique to him, and gachapin. He needs his 5-star uncap for both the strength on charge attack and his 1 turn anytime assassin. He's also having a harder time than most in the Combat System 2.0 fights because his charge attack inflicts a mod bar cut, but there are no mod bars in version 2, And also, the 6 dragons as well as Bubs just ignore Phalanx. They're going to have to work extra hard to try and make him viable, especially in his 4-star version. But other than Trio, they've done an alright job with both 6 and 7, so maybe Uno can have some hope too. Being a defensive character though, he might end up stepping on someone else's feet no matter what other mechanics he gets. Constant nukes, that's Vayne's job. Elemental Shift, it's on Europa. AoE cover, Vayne and Halloween Rosetta have got you covered. Dispel Cancel, Cat has it, with a build too. What's funny is that the AoE Unchallenged somehow ended up on Summer Lucio as well. Also on the Eternal side, Quotre is bringing delay on charge attack, gravity and dispel, so I think it's unlikely that we'll see those added to him as well. It's kind of hard to imagine changes for a character whose mechanics don't work or just get ignored in raids in which he's supposed to shine. I'm afraid he's in for another big overhaul or at least a priming for the 6-star uncap. So if you had to wish for a good defensive character who could still buff and deal some nice damage, who would you base your wish on and why is that character Athena? Her kit is completely overloaded and she has access to a few buffs that are relatively new as far as Eternals are concerned. A turn-based elemental shift and armored, which in water is currently only available on N. Another easy choice would of course be Christmas Narmaya, since they're both mechanically similar. Narune is lacking the team-wide buffs, but making up for them with constant multi-hit nukes and a real beefy echo. As far as changes go, the Modbar cut on charge attack barely does anything, it can be safely traded away for pretty much any other mechanic. Armored or a team-wide repel like his One Rift Spear would look pretty good up there. Spiral Spear is an alright nuke, but it would work better as a 10 hits since every instance benefits from supplemental damage. Also, multi-hits help in V2 fights. Fleeting Spark might already be alright, the substitute could use the ability to tank AoEs as well, the counter could be upgraded into a counter on dodge or damage and have its duration extended from 1 turn. But the Assassin is already an anytime one and lasts for the entire turn, so I can't really see this getting changed. Armed Bastion, despite being a 100% phalanx, it's suffering from simply being ignored by quite a lot of stuff. I wouldn't be surprised to see this turned into an unchallenged buff or completely reworked. Lastly, the 4th skill looks a bit weird. It's a 3 turns 100% damage absorption, but it helps the elemental damage you take, so it cuts the healing in half. I don't think it even works for plain damage too. Maybe turn this into a turn-based elemental switch, possibly for some 4 to 5 turns too instead of 3, and just let it work with Lele. I would like to see some more reliance on counters as well. Water only has Uno and N using them, but the Biden still looks kind of fun. I think Uno is going to be one of the characters to watch for. He's got a lot to gain from this. The other water character is Summer Europa. It feels a bit soon for her, but I guess she wasn't really comparable to Summer Alex and Valentine Grimnir in terms of power. She's another character I've never gotten, so I'm left with simply having to rely on the wiki for info. At first glance, she looks like she's got some issues generating her starry water stacks to properly buff allies. She begins the battle with 2 and she needs to consume them for a 3 turns 20% echo and crit buff, but she still needs them for her bonus damage on charge attack and the multi-hits on skill 1. Starry Waters only restocks with damage skill casts, 1 every 5 turns, triple attacks and a 40% chance to gain 1 at the end of the turn with her support EMP. Her unique buff, Celestial Guidance, brings some really nice stats for one character, comparable if not better than Folia's single target buff, but with a 1 turn longer cooldown. In order to grant DCA reactivation though, it's going to require 5 Starry Water stacks, which are going to take a while to get. I'm guessing that is what is going to be affected the most. Her charge attack and first skill might see the removal of the Starry Water stack requirements in order to cap on their multi-hits, while the third skill might see the removal of the 2 stack consumption per cast and simply becoming team-wide from the get-go. This is also going to lower the amount of turns required to get the full effect from Starry Fate, but even so, it still looks far too plain of a kit compared to what the other disciples got. The auto-revive might be nice, but the passives for the team-wide heal and clear upon revive looks a bit too niche as well. Her kit should work as an alternative to her base version in fights where you might not need the elemental switch, damage reduction and boost water attack buffs. The multi-hits make her alright for V2 fights, but she's still lacking something. A big problem for her is the existence of Summer Cagliostro, yet another staff specialty buffer requiring a bit of setup but bringing some pretty insane buffs. Keen on charge attack, 3 out of 6 turns, crit plus keen uptime from her skill 1, attack, defense and DATA for one character with 100% uptime, and a 2-hit nuke plus dispel that can be cast up to 3 times in a single turn. Also 10% echo on crits and a boost to crit rate based on the amount of crests. Sadly, Summer Europa can't really compete with that, so I think she's going to get changed in a way to find her own identity, and I think that road will lead towards an EO-type character with skill nukes and automatic reactivations. Moving on, we've got Earth. This time the only slot has been assigned to Siegfried, even though there are plenty more Earth characters who could use a rebalance, despite the element receiving some really broken ones lately. Either that, or try and fix some past mistakes. Earth Siegfried comes in with an extra nuke on charge attack that can come in handy for OTK setups. The 20% water damage cut for 3 turns might be a little bit low and see a raise, and he's got an alright self attack up on a unique modifier. After Uno, he's the second character in the list that has a skill affecting the enemy's mode bar, so we might see something done about that. His only passive though is kind of laughable, as it's a 3% chance for a small self-heal. Much like Yuel, I think Siegfried is going to inherit some mechanics from his wind and fire versions, mostly seeing changes for his third skill, passive and maybe gaining a second passive as well. At this point, every other new knight has gotten an automatic skill activation of some sort. I don't think Siegfried will be any different. His skill 1 might get changed to be a simple damaging skill and be activated on charge attack, replacing the 600k base cap nuke. Both his other versions come with a defense down, so a stackable Earth one seems likely. I would like to see Delirium become a charged Diamond Drain instead of a mode bar 1. Maybe take 1 turn off of its cooldown too. His second skill could get some effects from the fire version's passive, adding the guaranteed double attack and the boost to CA specs to it, while the defensive skill could be moved to a new fourth one, bringing both the damage cut and a debuff resistance up to try and keep up with the spam from Wamdus. Passive-wise, his 20% boost to skill damage and 10% boost to skill damage cap from his fire version would be great to see carried over, but I'm afraid it might make the character too much of a carbon copy of the other. Instead, I would look more over to what they've done with like Percival, because Earth is still lacking a crest character buffing skill specs. On the win side, we find the dreaded server crusher, Summer Jeanne, who came as quickly as she went. Everyone sparked for their new blondie and she got rotated out of the meta in a matter of a few weeks. When Summer Anila was released, she looked at her kit, thought she could do better and went to steal Jeanne's charge attack, second skill and part of her first passive, while adding a 20% wind defense down, a 1 ally dodge plus 30% echo for 3 turns, and a neat 10% attack buff on a unique modifier for everyone. Summer Jeanne still has a better defense down, 25% single-sided, 15% elemental, and her staple elemental attack up and damage cut on her charge attack. But a single target heal, armored and strength buff doesn't really come close to a dodge all and it returns 30% echo, while the 30% normal attack cap can be provided by a lot more characters. The 2020 boost to crit rate could have honestly just been an EMP, but at least her self boost to the ATA still looks alright. I think Summer Jeanne will see the biggest changes on her second and third skill, possibly some rework on her self crit passive as well. Her issue is going to be to differentiate herself from Summer Anila, while also trying to avoid invading Tiamat's territory. Both her light versions look like a no-go, a simple 30% boost to charge bouts every 7 turns isn't really much, nor is the strength and TA self buff. A boost to all allies attack based on how high Summer Jeanne's HP is would be pretty cool to see though. Meanwhile, all that's left to steal from her grand version would be the supplemental damage buff and the crit plus damage cap plus assassin skill, which I think it's nailed pretty deep in there. With Lumberjack providing another easy source of strength and the normal attack cap being so and so, there aren't that many options for her to go with. Reversal Tide could use the addition of a local damage amplification debuff, it would work great for any multi-hitting characters and make Valentine Grimnir even more of a monster. Salvation could be straight up turned into an AoE if it got a 3 out of 6 turns uptime. Maybe turn the heal into a refresh or revitalize and the border into a yellow one to allow use on full auto. For Banner of the Brave, I'm afraid it's time to pull some stops and go for anything that can boost the damage cap, be it more supplemental damage, echo, damage boosted or CA specs boosted. Sadly, that's it for Wind. It looks like Korva's rework is going to have to wait a little while longer. So we move on to Light and the list opens with Song. I can't even properly express how happy I am to finally see her face in here. She's been my first Eternal, first 5-star one, she's got her Intricacy ring and she's about to get her 6-star rank cap first, no matter how good any of the other is going to be. Song has always been in one of my light teams and she's also the only character for whom I've ever bought a skin, not even just in Granblue. Ever. I think this speaks volumes already about how much I want her Rebalance to be good, but her problem isn't only an underwhelming kit, her problem is the reliance on a broken mechanic that forces new bosses to be immune to it or die without moving. Paralyze is too strong of a debuff to be allowed to be raid wide and lasts for up to 3 minutes per person. They've been trying to work around this back when UVHL was first released by letting the boss still perform its triggers while paralyzed, but ever since it's been almost complete immunity across the board. What's left is a pretty decent crit buff on CA, a weird one-turn dodge all without substitute and a skill damage cap, and of course her deluge of debuffs. Even without paralyzing, Clincher still does some alright damage for not being Flowery 7, and her 4th skill is honestly okay as is. Since I find it unlikely that they're going to rework Paralyze, I think they might at least free Song from its shackles and let her focus on debuffs and skill damage instead. Merculight's 30% boost to skill damage cap is quite nice, but her damage skills are on a 7 turns cooldown and a 1 time per raid ready in 10 turns. The other skill damage effect she procs is a small 270k base cap nuke from her EM support skill, which can proc once every 5 turns unless you can bring out an outside source of dodge, which for Light pretty much only means frequency gem from Nighthound. I would like to see Song become better at dodging and counter with skill damage, getting an actual dodge rate increase buff that may help her proc her EM support skill multiple times during the 3 turns the skill cap up is active. Also a better damage output or some multi-hits on that EM support skill. Depravity is mostly okay, even though some of its debuffs could be improved by simply becoming stackable ones. Debuffed resistance, attack and defense down can bypass the immunity to those debuffs in some raids if they're stackable instead of standard. The 15% ones just get overwritten by better single-sided ones anyway. Clincher is again alright, but I wouldn't say no to the addiction of a Dispel to make up for the fact that the Paralyze is useless 90% of the time. Passive-wise, her attacks being AoE doesn't really come into play all that often, and I guess I'll just be greedy for once. I wish to see this changed so it inflicts extra hits on random foes with each attack. Yeah, it's taken straight from Valentine Grimnir, but being skill damage would work so well with her skill 1, and even better if Silva is around to supplement that damage with her weak point. I know that Io is already pretty broken when it comes to multi-hits, and giving Song the ability to hit 12 times a turn with a triple attack might be a bit too much, but who can stay impartial when it comes to their favorite character? I'm keeping my fingers crossed and hoping for the best. At least she can't get any worse. Next up is Mary, right on time for Christmas. The delay on her charge attack is quite alright, and thanks to Noah she might get a double cast on it too, acting a bit like Valentine Clarice when it comes to keeping bosses at bay. Her first kit is a simple AoE nuke, but it also raises bounty by 3 levels. Her passive does give her a unique attack up for each bounty stack, but it's fairly small. Also, bounty doesn't really mean much nowadays when most of the sought after drops come from blue chests. It might still be alright for farming though. Piece of Cake gives a 20% boost to charge bar, 120 crit, and a 50% boost to attack and defense to one ally. It can be upcapped permanently, but you'll generally want a bit more from a single target buff. Her third skill brings a team-wide triple attack buff for 1 turn every 7, which isn't bad and can be used for bursts in a luchador setup, same as Summer Diantha. Lastly, her second passive will give you a 20% chance at the end of each fight to get some extra materials. I think she'll see a bit of a buff on her first skill and possibly have her second skill and her first passive reworked. Since bounty is kind of rare of a debuff, I think it would be fun to give her something to play off of it instead of a 1% attack per stack. No one else in Light applies it, and it would take her 10 turns to cast the skill 3 times. Also, applying bounty past level 7 becomes pretty hard, which is why the guaranteed application from Tweyen used to be quite a big deal. Getting back the chance to apply bounty on normal attacks, or even better, applying one stack of bounty upon dealing a triple attack wouldn't be too bad, especially if paired with a team-wide echo or a supplemental damage effect based on bounty level. Piece of cake would be great for burst setups if it were turned into a team-wide buff with a bit of a longer cooldown, but I think it's going to stay single target and maybe get a bit of a better buff instead. Ignition plus charge attack specs wouldn't be bad, and it would also allow her to use her delay on charge attack more often, otherwise the usual attack specs like Folia and Summer Europa. Last in the list is Dark Narmaya, and this is a big finale for her as well. She got a bit mistreated with her 5-star, and after Sturm, Drang and Anthuria, she's the last character whose stances are still a pain to use. Her first skill, Butterfly Effects, allow her to switch stance once every 3 turns, giving her a 70% echo for 4 turns, a stackable attack cap, stackable defense down, and a 1-turn skill sealed that can't be cleared. Her charge attack also changed based on the stance in which she is, with the Dawnfly granting her more stackable attack cap and a 30% dark attack cap, while the Free Flutter clears her self-inflicted defense down stacks and gives her a 2x mirror image. Her second skill brings either a double and triple attack cap or a 25% defense down, while her third skill brings either a delay or her overdrive assassin. At 5 stars she gains a fourth skill that allows for both effects on her second or third skill to activate at the same time, while granting her an uplift and a boost to CA specs for one time. Passive-wise, a simple 10% normal attack buff for drafts, primals and others, and a 5% chance to reflect 99% of the damage taken. I really hope she gets her kit straightened out, with her stances clearly defined as an offensive and a defensive one. Butterfly Effect is probably going to turn into a 0 cooldown stance toggle, losing the silence too, with her 2 stances granting passive buffs each turn they're active. Her multi-attack buff is a bit low, especially when compared to her Christmas version, and pretty much every other assassin has gotten a guaranteed triple attack and has seen their Break Assassin and Overdrive Assassin skills turn into an anytime one. So for her Dawnfly stance, she might get a stackable attack up each turn, with her second skill carrying the 4 turns 70% echo and 1 turn triple attack, while her third skill gets the anytime assassin. Even just this change is going to make her a lot more usable, instead of having to use skill 2, skill 1 and waiting a turn before using skill 3. The Free Flutter stance is probably going to need a few new things though. The defense down is never going to be used, and the 5% mode bar increase doesn't really mean much. The mirror image on charge attack and the delay are the only 2 useful things in here, but if you give her a stackable defense down and a passive delay cast, you've pretty much just brought Sturm to Dark, and Tanya already kind of fills that role. Both her Valentine and Christmas versions play with dodge and counters and carry a substitute as well, so maybe a bit more of a tank-oriented stance wouldn't be too out of the question. Still, as long as we get a 2 buttons anytime assassin on Esan, that's already going to be a big win. Alright then, here's the bingo card with my hopes and predictions. Let me know which characters you're hoping for the most down in the comments. And I usually never do this because I feel uncomfortable telling people what to do, but apparently it works, so please subscribe. And that's it for me for the moment. As always, thank you all for watching and see you around soon. Ciao!